Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. Lots of news this morning already. First and foremost, the Jeff Britt trial is live. You can listen to it on GoLocal. There's motions to dismiss after the defense rests yesterday, after the prosecution rested yesterday. Depending on the judge's decision on that, we'll hear from the defense today. Former Attorney General Robert Correnti is leading the defense team for Jeff Britt. Much news, and we expect Speaker of the House, Nick Mattiello, to be Jeff Britt's first witness. So stay tuned on that. Also this morning, big news relative to the Rhode Island Supreme Court. The Judicial Nominating Committee came forward with their list of 5 potential candidates. The governor can select one of those, but simultaneous to that, Judge Flaherty announced that he would be retiring, so there will actually be 2 vacancies. She cannot pick from the same list that goes through the process all over again. But obviously there's massive cries to put the first minority on the state Supreme Court. Only 1 member of the 5 is a minority. That would be Superior Court Judge Melissa Long. So stay tuned on that. Much more coverage on both the Britt trial and on the Supreme Court coming up later today. Let's go to Washington, to Virginia. University of Virginia Chair of the Political Science Department, Jennifer Lawless. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm happy to.
Okay, last night, the one and only VP debate, Mike Pence and Senator Harris. Your takeaway, your big view of what took place last night.
From my perspective, and I think from the perspective of most watchers, it was all about COVID, and not because the candidates talked about it, not because Susan Page asked about it, but because of the plexiglass barriers, and at the end, the juxtaposition between Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, walking up onto the stage wearing a mask and Karen Pence not. And so no matter what they were discussing, no matter what the question or the issue, it was difficult to look at that stage and not see that there have been millions of infections and hundreds of thousands of deaths under the Trump-Pence watch. And that's just a really difficult visual to get away from if you're Mike Pence.
Yeah, listen, Mike Pence probably from a debate standpoint had everything stacked up against him. Who scored well? What were the highlights for both of the both Pence and Senator Harris?
Well, as far as Mike Pence is concerned, he demonstrated that he's not Donald Trump. And so the discipline that he exercised, although he did exceed time limits and he did interrupt Harris, there was not the general sense of rudeness or going off the rails that we saw from Donald Trump. And I think that, that's part of the reason why the overwhelming majority of watchers believe that he's qualified to be president, not only in terms of substance, but also temperament. And so juxtaposing himself to Donald Trump in terms of demeanor and style was very effective, even though if you were to just read the transcripts, there's very little differentiating what they actually said when you compare Trump and Pence. As far as Harris was concerned, she too was overwhelmingly evaluated as qualified to be president, which is helpful for the Biden campaign. I think her most effective moments were when she spoke to the camera, similar to how Joe Biden did that last week. And just reminding the American people that a Biden-Harris administration cares more about them than about politics. And so those seem to me to be her most effective lines. Also, I think every woman in America could relate when she sort of smiled and said, "I'm speaking." And the gender gap after the election, after the debate, was quite remarkable, with women preferring Harris by about 30 points and men breaking even between the two.
Did she run any risk of, we've criticized Al Gore in the past for smirks and sighs, etc. Did she overplay that technique?
I didn't think so. I mean, part of Al Gore's problem was that it was also so loud, right? We all remember that sighing, like it was this very, very deliberate sigh. With Kamala Harris, I think most of the time there was a little bit of a smirk, but if you look at Mike Pence, he was doing the same thing and nodding his head and shaking no, no, no. So I don't think that either of them went too far in terms of their body language. I do think that the fact that he constantly exceeded his time limit and seemed to be speaking over both Kamala Harris and Susan Page works to his detriment. If it had been another male candidate up there or even a male moderator, I don't know if it would be perceived as so damning. But you don't want to be the guy who's shushing the women, and that's how he came across.
So one important question that the moderator, Susan Page, asked was, you're partnered in this campaign with men in their mid to late 70s. Have you had a conversation about their health and what could potentially be a transition? And it was a very logical question by the moderator. And brilliantly, neither one even came close to responding to the question. I was disappointed that Susan Page didn't double back and force them to respond to it. But here's a reality. Joe Biden's 77. It's going to be 78, I believe, before taking office. Donald Trump is 73 or 74. They're both going to be the oldest elected presidents. There's just a reality. Tom Brady can only eat so much kale and can only play so long. These guys, there's a complexity to their health, and both of them have had health issues during the course of their lives. Did we miss the opportunity to find out something important about both these tickets?
I think it's a shame that they both punted, but I think we all know the answer and why they couldn't give it. So Donald Trump believes that he's invincible. If Mike Pence would have acknowledged that they've had that conversation, if they did, Donald Trump would probably say, I don't know what he's talking about. I just beat COVID. It's just not something that you can imagine him responding to well. As far as Biden and Harris are concerned, the problem, I think, is that at this point, and perhaps the debate last night changed this perception, there's this sense that Harris is far to the left of Biden. And when you're up in the polls and when it looks like independents and blue collar workers in battleground states are moving toward your campaign, you don't want to do anything to signal that the way that they perceive you might be overshadowed by a more liberal running mate. And so, I think that's part of it. I do think that what she could have said was, of course, we've discussed this. The reality is we both agree about all of these issues. And, we're more interested in taking power in January. We'll talk about the future when we get there. But, I think strategically it makes sense that both of them dodged it. I just couldn't believe how explicitly they did it.
Yeah, they weren't even coming even slightly close to responding to her question. The big news wasn't last night's debate, but was this morning's, where the debate organizers for the next presidential debate are requesting that this be done virtually because of questions of whether or not President Trump still is contagious. If you do the clock and based on the science, he could be still contagious, depending on when he contracted it and when he demonstrated symptoms. The president rejected that proposal. Give us the background and tell us where we are.
The really interesting piece of this is that the Presidential Debate Commission, decided to move the candidates into a virtual setting, but Steve Scully, the moderator from C-SPAN, and the town hall would still meet in Miami. So it's that the candidates would basically be Zooming in, but there would still be live people asking questions, which makes it a real debate. The irony of Trump pulling out of this is that if he would not have misled about his diagnosis in the first place, and if he would tell everybody when he had that last negative test prior to testing positive, this might not have actually been necessary. The only reason that he would still be contagious next Thursday is if we believe his timeline, that he didn't actually contract the disease until last Thursday. So he's now stuck in a situation where either he's lying then or he's lying now. I think it's politically, I question the politics of this. He said this morning that it's a waste of time to do a virtual debate. And I don't think that the millions of Americans who have yet to cast their ballots, or the specific undecided voters who are looking to that debate, feel that it would be a waste of time. I also don't think that the Biden campaign thinks that it would be a waste of time, given that they were able to shore up quite a bit of support following the last debate. So, you can take Trump's word, or you can assume that it also has to do with the lackluster and, quite frankly, offensive performance that he turned in last time. But it's hard to imagine that there would be a third debate, or the terms that the Biden campaign would agree to after the Trump campaign is playing politics with the second one.
So I don't understand the strategy from the president's standpoint, because he needs a big punch. He's down, depending on whose poll and what trending you want to look at, 8 to 16 points, depending on the situation. But most of the polls are showing double digits with, just a couple weeks, 3 weeks to go. He needs a significant performance in this debate. There's no other opportunity that we know of, although every day everything changes. And he needs to break this momentum by Biden, because he's just piling up bad news on top of bad news. Is this just posturing to try and force the rules and show he's in charge? Or does he really walk away from this debate?
I was thinking about that this morning. You might remember in 2008, John McCain suggested that he and Barack Obama not go to the presidential debate because we were on the brink of fiscal ruin, and it was important that they spend all of their time focusing on the fiscal crisis. And Barack Obama was sort of like, yeah, you do whatever you want. I'm coming to the debate. And I think that this is similar. I wouldn't be surprised if the Biden campaign says, look, I don't care if he doesn't zoom in. I'm happy to answer the questions of voters who have yet to make up their mind and who want to know where we fall on the issues. I think that the Trump campaign is probably weighing the very concerns that you articulated about how he needs to break through with the fact that if this is a virtual debate, again, the optics are because he contracted COVID on his own watch, and that becomes difficult to move away from. He also said that he doesn't like the idea of a virtual debate because the moderator can turn him off and he's not going to be silenced. That's exactly the reason that a virtual debate might actually be informative to the American people. So I think that this is a mistake. And the further we get away from today and closer to November, the more difficult it is for him to make up any lost ground. I'm sure the Biden campaign is cheering this morning.
So we're about 3 weeks away from the election, and based on polling, it looks like Joe Biden has a commanding lead. But 3 weeks ago, in the past 3 weeks, we've had a Supreme Court justice pass away. We've had a new Supreme Court justice be nominated. We've seen a disastrous differentiating presidential debate. We've seen the President of the United States contract COVID and arguably return to office subsequent. We've seen a vice presidential debate. A lot can happen in 3 weeks, and while the last 3 weeks have been mostly good for Joe, we don't know what the next 3 weeks could be like. Is there a pathway for the president to win re-election?
There is. If you look at the battleground states, and if you look at the polling in those states, in most cases, Joe Biden is not up by a double-digit lead. In several of them, he's even within the margin of error. So that's why a good debate performance by Donald Trump, or sort of a reset on the COVID button, which I thought he was going to do once he contracted the disease, could have fundamentally changed these dynamics. As we go from 25 to 20 to 15 days away, it becomes harder to do that, even if there is this jolt or this shock to the system, because people are voting. And so millions of Americans have already cast their ballots. And every day that the president decides to double down and pursue his base strategy, there are hundreds of thousands of independent voters probably casting ballots for Joe Biden. So this is a little bit different than previous election cycles, where the overwhelming majority of people, even if they had the opportunity to take advantage of early voting or absentee voting, didn't, and they went to the polls on election day. Here, every day is election day between now and November 3rd. And, although there's still room in some of these battleground states, Trump could succeed. The one thing I'll note, though, is that if you take into account the polling data, it's getting increasingly likely that Donald Trump would have to win the overwhelming majority, if not 80 or 90% of undecided voters at this point, in order to pull off a victory. And if they're the ones that are still looking for new information over the course of the next 3 weeks, opting not to debate makes that an incredibly unlikely prospect.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. I will just forewarn, I believe the Billy Bush tape came out Columbus Day weekend 4 years ago, which was supposedly the knockout punch to Donald Trump. So I understand the numbers were different. He wasn't up for re-election. The margins were different. But, I think Democrats hopefully have learned that he's not always dead when you think he's dead. I'm sure Democrats have horror movie-like analogies to be able to remember that you got to put the stake actually in the heart.
Right. Although, remember, too, that the Billy Bush tape was the day that the Democrats were about to declare victory. But then 11 days before the election was Comey's letter.
Right.
And so, who knows if the Billy Bush tape actually would have been the stake in the heart had the Comey letter not come out. But I think that's exactly right. We have no idea what's going to happen between now and the election. The difference is that a greater proportion of Americans have already voted.
Yeah, I think there's two factors. One, Joe Biden needs to stay in his basement and stay safe. He can't contract COVID. And Comey, the Democrat, should make sure that he is locked in his basement and doesn't come up with some old memo that he prepared from relative to Vice President Joe Biden. What should we be looking at for the next week?
The stimulus talks. I mean, this didn't get a lot of attention last night, but in another show of complete stunningness, Donald Trump basically told the Republicans to cut off talks about any kind of stimulus package that would help and hold off until after the election. Again, not a strategy that would work with the millions of Americans who are having a hard time making ends meet, and not a strategy that the Republicans in Congress are supporting either. And so the fact that these Republicans in Congress are not endorsing this plan suggests that Donald Trump may have to renege on his clear statement that we should stop this altogether. And if anybody would look weak in that position, it would be Trump. So I'll be interested to follow what goes on there, both because it looks like for the first time, the Republicans are not willing to say, yeah, this is a good strategy. His spokespeople are, his surrogates are on the campaign trail. But when you look at actual elected officials and government leaders, I think they think that this is a little bit too risky, especially given that party control of the Senate is at stake as well.
Jennifer Lawless, as always, you've been in Politico this week, New York Times this week. We appreciate it. GoLocal Prov every week when you're on. I want to thank you so much for taking the time. We know how busy you are at the University of Virginia right now, tracking this major election. For everybody else, we'll have updates on the Jeff Britt trial. We'll have updates on what's going on the Rhode Island State Supreme Court. Please stay tuned, stay safe, and please wear your mask.